everyone, I'm Stephanie Weaver, author of the upcoming Migraine Relief Plan cookbook. Welcome back to the Blue and Yellow Kitchen. In each episode, I make a dish inspired by a new book while talking to its author. Today's book is Clark and Division, and I'm making Yuri's Spam Fried Rice. I'd like to welcome Naomi Hirahara, author of Clark and Division. Welcome, Naomi.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you in the kitchen. Give us a quick overview of what happens in this mystery.
Sure. It follows the story of the Ito family, a Japanese-American family from Los Angeles who are incarcerated in Manzanar detention center during World War II. The older sister, Rose, goes to Chicago first, and then the younger sister, Aki, and her parents follow, only to discover something tragic has befallen Rose.
Yes. So tell us what inspired you to write this book.
There's been a lot of books about the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, but people kind of forget, well, what happened to these people after they were released? I think we just think, oh, magically everything's restored and, it's like a happy ending. But actually it was a time of great struggle, and which I discovered too by co-writing a nonfiction book called Life After Manzanar.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to feature it. I lived for 15 years in Chicago. I actually visited, and I'm familiar with a lot of the locations that where the book is set. And I was in the museum field and often went to Chicago History Museum and had never heard of how many Japanese Americans were relocated to Chicago. So for me, even though I should have known about it, it was a new story. And I think it's also so timely today with all of the issues with violence against Asian Americans, immigration, racism, all those things. I feel like it just, that's what I love about fiction is I think it can bring those current day events to life in a way and help people understand and kind of get in the heads of characters and feel it more deeply than maybe a nonfiction book might.
Definitely. And I think we forget that, 2/3 of these people were Americans or born in America. So I think it tells a lot and is worth examining, especially in light of, the principles that our country was formed on.
Absolutely. So tell us about Aki, the heroine of the story.
The point of view of the younger sister, Aki, who's in the shadow of her shining star sister, Rose. So when something tragic befalls Rose, now it's up to Aki to step into the shoes as the leader of the family, to find out what's happened to Rose, as well as to carry her parents during this very chaotic period in their lives.
Absolutely. Do you have a favorite scene or character?
I actually like this character, Hammer. And I don't know how many people are familiar with the Zoot Suiters of the 1940s, mostly Latino. Hammer is part of that group in Los Angeles before World War II, so he's wearing the big jackets and loose pants and has the chains actually stolen from the chains that held the sink stoppers in Manzanar. And now they're plopped in this very notorious town of Chicago. And, he's trying to navigate everything, and he gets into trouble, which is great for a mystery.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of super interesting characters. Chicago was pretty seedy back then, and certainly the neighborhood that they were living in, there's a lot of poverty. We're going to talk about that in a minute with this recipe. And so it was so fascinating to me to see the town that I knew very well, but 40, 50 years earlier than I lived there. So the recipe I'm making today is Yuri's Spam Fried Rice. First of all, tell us who Yuri is and tell us about the recipe.
So Yuri is the matriarch. She's the mother of Rose and Aki. And she's from Japan and was a picture bride. So she, came over here not knowing not that much about her future husband, but they build a life together in America. So during World War II, we all are familiar with Spam, right? And I know a lot of GIs are tired of it, but that was like the main protein from for families. It didn't need refrigeration. And so a lot of Japanese American families, as well as, mainstream American families, used it in cooking. So this is with a kind of a Japanese twist because it's in fried rice. And it includes rice, spam, and a bit of color green bean.
Great. So can you set up, I've asked you to Naomi, to read a passage for us that's going to kind of tease the story, because we definitely want you to buy the book. It's a fantastic read. While she's doing that, I'm going to plate up the fried rice, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the recipe. So why don't you set up what you're going to read, and then go ahead and read it for us.
So this section is when Aki and her parents are on the train arriving to Chicago for the first time, eagerly awaiting to be reunited with Rose. When I returned to our seats, most of my makeup was on my handkerchief as I cleansed my face with some cold water. Pop had already fallen asleep, the brim of his hat lowered over his eyes. Sticking out from the band was the edge of the paper, now completely yellowed, that listed the location of our earthly belongings in Los Angeles. I wonder if Rose will meet us at the station, Mom said. We hadn't heard from Rose for a couple of weeks. I had sent her a telegram about our Chicago arrival date, but didn't receive a response back. We weren't worried at the time. It wasn't like she could call us in camp. Mom suspected Rose was lovesick about some young man in the city. On the train, we saw Nisei GIs, handsome in their pressed uniforms, and I imagined that someone like that had captured Rose's heart. As we got closer to our destination, I could tell Pop was getting excited. He was sitting straight up as the train lurched back and forth. He kept looking out the window and back towards the passengers leaving and entering. Oh, to see Rose, the flash of Rose's smile, that in itself would be enough for me. When we finally arrived at Union Station, Pop was the first out the door with his one suitcase. The train station was so huge and grand, with majestic white-colored marble walls. A huge war bonds poster was on display below the clock, while the flags of military allies, the United States, Great Britain, France, and Australia, hung down by vertical beams. In the center of the station was a USO desk to serve all the soldiers who were on leave and needed instructions on the best accommodations and recreation. As we stumbled into this mass of humanity, we saw a group of Japanese Americans walking toward us. I recognized one of our former Nisei camp leaders, Ed Tamura. Ed had hightailed out of Manzanar as soon as he could. His face was round and smooth. If he had to shave every day, I would be surprised. Then I spotted Roy and his slick back hair, drooping a bit in the May heat. I first felt embarrassed that there was this welcome party for us. We were simply the Itos, a former Los Angeles produce manager, his wife and younger daughter. I searched the group for my sister, but there was no bright smile, lipstick applied perfectly in spite of the humidity. Something's happened. I could barely hear Mr. Tamura's voice over the hubbub in the building. Roy couldn't look at us. There was an accident at the subway station last night, he said. Before he could declare, she's dead, I knew. I had felt it in my bones when I was getting sick on the train. Rose had departed this earth as dramatically as only she could have done.
Thank you, Naomi. So that's what the book's about, is figuring out what happened to Rose. And Aki kind of settling into her life and finding her way, and her parents finding their way. And it's a beautiful story. Naomi, you read that beautifully too, so thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and show off this spam fried rice to the camera. And then see if you tell me how it looks. What do you think?
It looks beautiful. Perfect. I could smell the spam.
Yes. So I'm going to give a little recipe tip. So if you want it to be more authentically Japanese, the way Naomi makes it, you would use like a very short grain sushi rice, japonica rice. If you want it more loosely textured, I used a medium grain rice. I rinsed it 6 times, so it was very clear. You cook it and then you actually spread it out on a tray so it kind of dries a little bit, and that way it doesn't clump up when you're frying it in the pan. So we've got some green peas, the fried Spam, which you recommended the light Spam, so it's a little lower in sodium, which is good for me, and also a little bit less fat. And then a little bit of homegrown scallions for color on the top. And tell us a little bit more about why besides the Spam, like give us the sense of what they were eating and the poverty, because I think it's a really important aspect of this recipe while I give it a taste.
Well, in camp itself, everyone ate in mess halls, and the disadvantage of that was it kind of split the families, because like young people, instead of eating with their families, they were eating with their peers. And of course, you're cooking in one camp, there might be 10,000 people. There's, several different mess halls. So just like rice itself would not taste good. It'd be all clumped together. Everything was mass produced. So when Aki is in Chicago, just very simple things like sukiyaki, and of course like shoyu or soy sauce is very coveted. That's a coveted spice among Japanese and Japanese Americans. That in itself will make her kind of cry. Just these meats and things. Everybody, of course, were under limitations on how much meat they can have, but things like that, and a little bit of sugar to sweeten the sukiyaki, those kind of things would be pretty powerful for a family who was just released from camp.
Absolutely. And they, they're, just imagine it's a very, very tiny apartment. They're cooking on a hot plate. They have possibly an ice box, which we used to have in our camper when I was growing up. So I remember very well how the ice box does not keep food very cold, and you have to keep changing out the ice if you can afford to do that back in this time period. And so it probably would have been canned peas. The rice is a dry good, so it's not going to spoil. You've got the Spam, which again doesn't spoil, but maybe they might have used half of a can for one dish and half of a can for something else to make that meat go farther. So I felt like this was such a great representation both of the culture, but also the time period and how difficult things might have been. So the taste of it, it's savory, it's meaty, it's got a little bit of sweetness both from the soy sauce and the Spam. There's that pop of green onion and the color and the pop of the green peas. And then you have that comforting feeling of the rice with little crispy bits on it. So I just thought it was a fantastic recipe to showcase your book. So thank you for sharing it. It was in your book club guide, and I thought it was a great recipe to showcase.
Thank you. Yeah, Clark and Division was a neighborhood in Chicago where a lot of early Japanese Americans on leave who were released from camp went to. And there were a couple of Japanese grocery stores that eventually established itself in that area.
That's great. So yeah, but even though there might be those grocery stores, it would be very difficult. Maybe like it would be a special thing to get the kind of rice they liked or to have a little soy sauce. So I think it was a fantastic choice to showcase the book. And it also shows how much research you did to get all the details right, because I didn't catch anything as I was reading it that I thought, is that from that era? Like everything felt so realistic and well researched. So even though it's a great mystery with great characters, it's also beautifully researched, and I learned a lot. So Naomi, thank you so much for being here today. It's really been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You'll find the recipe link in the Facebook video or on my website, mygreenreliefrecipes.com. You'll find her and all of her books at naomihirahara.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend. Order a copy of Clark and Division wherever you like to buy books, and if you don't have a book buying budget right now, request it from your local library because that helps authors as well. Follow me at sweavermph and like my Facebook page so you don't miss an episode. Join us next time for another author interview and a dish inspired by their book. Thanks so much for watching The Blue and Yellow Kitchen.